We look at powers and roots at this time. Now we're going to concentrate on the square root, the squares and the square roots, the cube and the cube root. Now let's look at, first of all, the symbol used, but we're going to backtrack a bit and see the symbol used for multiplication, then see how it comes from multiplication to powers and then to roots. If you have, for example, 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, you have 5 different 3's and they're all added together, so it's repeated addition. The short way of writing this is to say, since there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3's and they all add together, then you say 3 multiplied by 5. That's a short way of writing repeated addition. Now suppose you have 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3. Then the situation here is that you have 5 3's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3's. Then you are going to shorten the way you write this. What you say is 3 to the power of 5, a superscript 5 like that. So this is a power. So the 3 raised to the 5th power is this. There are 5 3's and they all multiply. And the way you do this on the calculator is press the button 3. On some calculators there's a button looking like that, and then 5 equal. On other calculators you will see this, x to the power of y. Alright, now what we're going to be concentrating on is a square. So 3 square, it means 3 multiplied by 3. Therefore the square of a number is the result you get when you have 2 of those numbers and they multiply each other. Okay, 3 times 3 gives you 9. So 3 squared is 9. The square of 3 is 9. Now how do we go from 9 back to 3? What we say is that you start with 9, and what we want is what is called the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is a number. When you put 2 of them together and you multiply them, you get 9. In other words, the number multiplies itself to give you 9. The way you write the square root of 9 is this. Now originally the intention is for you to have a 2 here, showing you that it is the second root, the square root of 9, but by convention you just leave this sign as it is. So the square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 gives you 9. Now the thing is, 3 is not the only number that multiplies itself to give you 9. If you put -3 multiply by -3, you also get 9. So therefore, negative 3 is also a square root of 9. Okay? So the square root of 9 is 3 and negative 3. Square root of 9 is equal to 3 and is also equal to negative 3. So that's the square root of 9. Square root of 4 is equal to, what is it? It is 2 and negative 2, because 2 multiplied by 2 gives you 4. Also, negative 2 multiplied by negative 2 gives you 4. Now, when you're going to multiply the negative numbers, if you're going to use a calculator, you have to be careful. If you type negative 2 times negative 2, you will get a 4. But at the same time, you know that this is saying that 2 squared is equal to 4. If on many of the calculators, if you put in negative 2 squared just like this, you'll get a negative 4. Alright, wrong answer. Now, what happens is in the programming of the calculator. So I'm just going to show you that you have to be careful when you're using these calculators and squaring a number. If you put negative 2 squared, what the calculator is assuming, first of all, negative 2 means the same as negative 1 times 2. Okay? And the calculator is assuming that you mean negative 1 times 2 squared, which is negative 1 times 2 times 2. So what you get is negative 4. 2 2's is 4, so it's negative 1 by 4, which is negative 4. And that's not what you intended, so you must use the brackets. If you want negative 2 squared, you have to put it in open bracket. Open bracket negative 2, close bracket squared, and then you get your positive 4. Because it's negative 2 times negative 2, which is negative 1 by 2 by negative 1 by 2. So it's negative 1 by negative 1 by 2 by 2. That's what would happen in the calculator. Negative 1 by negative 1 is positive 1 times 2 2's 4, 1 4 4. So you have to be careful about using the calculator and squaring a negative number. Now, so the square, before I erase this, remember, the square of a number is a number that another number that multiplies itself to give you that original number. In other words, you have two of the same number and they multiply themselves one times the other to give you the original number. Now let's look at something before we finish off with square for now, with square and square root. Here, if you find the square root, let's say the square root of negative 4, what will happen? If you try to use your calculator to do it, you get an error message. Why? Here, you may say, what's the square root of negative 4? Is it negative 2? But negative 2 multiplied by negative 2 gives you a positive 4. When you multiply these, it gives you a positive 4. So it's not negative 2, because when you multiply it by itself, it doesn't give you negative 4, it's a positive 4. Now it might come to mind to say, alright, two numbers that multiply themselves to give negative 4, negative 2 and 2. gives you negative 4. But there's another problem. The square root must be the same number times itself. Two of the same number. When you multiply them, they give you the original number. Now, here, what you have is not two of the same number. It's two different numbers. So you have a problem. So the square root of negative 4 again is not negative 2 and 2, because negative 2 and 2 are two different numbers. So the square root of negative 4 really does not exist. It's referred to as an imaginary number, not a real number. Okay, so you can't find the square root of negative 4. So forget that for now. What happens if you have fractions? Here I want to find the square root of, for example, 4/9. Before I find the square root of 4/9, by the way, let me square 4/9, or square 2/3. What is the square root of 2/3? I mean, what is the square of 2/3? All of this squared. It is equal to 2 squared divided by 3 squared. You separate them. You can just separate them like this, because 2/3 squared, it means the same as 2/3 times 2/3, which is 2 by 2 up top over 3 by 3 down the bottom. 2 by 2 is really 2 squared, and 3 by 3 is really 3 squared. So you can always remove the bracket and square each of these independently. So what you have is 4/9. Okay, so 2/3 squared is 4/9. The top squared over the bottom squared. So 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. Good. Now what is the square root of 4/9? You can also separate these by saying it is the square root of 4 over the square root of 9. Okay, which is 2/3. So the square root of 4/9 is 2/3. You can see it from up here. 2/3 squared gives you 4/9. That means 4/9 square root gives you 2/3. Alright? Now, generally, remember, if you have the square root of a number, say x, the square root of a number, then you square the square root of a number, you square it, what you have is the number itself. So let's look at that a bit more. Now before I erase this, remember now, when you have a fraction and you square the fraction, you can separate the numerator and denominator and square each individually. When you have a fraction and square root the fraction, you can separate numerator and denominator and say it is the square root of the numerator over the square root of the denominator. Okay, now let's look back at the general statement that we're making, and this is useful when transposing formulas. if you have the square root of x, it is, and then you square the square root of x, what you get is x. In other words, the square root of x times the square root of x is equal to x. Just like the square root of 3 squared is the square root of 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. It's also negative 3, but we're concentrating on the positive root at this time. Now, suppose you say the square root of 16 squared. What this is the square root of 16 by 16, right? What is 16 by 16? 16 by 16. 16 1 6 6 36. Bring down the 6, carry 3, 6 1 6 7 8 9 96 1 6 6 1 1 1. When you add them, 6 9 and 6 15. Bring down the 5, carry 1 1 and 1 2 256. So the square root of 256. Now the number that multiplies itself to give 256 is 16. So the square root of 16 squared is 16. It's also negative 16, but we want to just concentrate for now on the positive square root. Alright. Now let's see what happens further. Let's go back here. Use up the space. And this time we will say, what is the square root of 16 and all of this squared? Then what we have is the square root of 16, let's say 4, and that will be squared. It's also negative 4, but let's use 4 for now. The square root of 16 is 4. 4 squared gives you 16. Alright, we could consider the negative 4 too. The square root of 16 is also negative 4, and when you square that you get 16. So the thing is, the square root of 16, and you square all of that, you get 16. Down here, the square root of 16, and that 16 is squared, you get 16. So if you find the square root of 16 and then you square all of that, you get 16. And if you find the square root of 16 squared, you get 16. So one conclusion I can make from this is that if you have any number x and you square x and find the square root of all of that, you get x. And if you have the square root of x and you square all of that, you get back the same x. Okay, so these apply for every number. All right, what we'll do is go to the cube root for another lesson. What we have done so far is the square and the square root. Alright, so we'll leave the cube root for a different time. So I will see you then.